Today's Friday. Got some good news. Laremy Tunsil is a Pro Bowl starter. We also talked to Brandon K. Scott from 16 Radio.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Friday episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm John Hickman, joined by Cody Davis, and today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before, because BetOnline is where the game starts. It's cold in the city of Houston. We finally got a winter where it feels like winter. I looked outside last night and I heard some noise. And I looked outside and it was like this big old fat guy just in the sky riding.
Oh my gosh. Isn't that supposed to take place on Saturday and not last night?
It's hot cold, but in Houston, you don't know what the weather, so he had to come make his drops early. He had to get that out the way, man. And then, I live a Black Christmas, so in my dream, I was just sitting there asleep. And then I heard some more noise. And I woke up and all I heard was in my mind. But in my mind for the Houston Texans, in some positive light that we have to shine, it's our job and duty to do so, and I'm proud to do so. Laremy Tunsil, Pro Bowl starter for the 2023 Pro Bowl. Houston also has some alternatives, which we'll get to, which we'll get into. But I can't say and speak highly enough of Laremy Tunsil this season. And I'll tell you why, really, man. Just him being a Pro Bowler, I'll get to that because I also feel like he should be an All-Pro as well. I also feel like Titus Howard should be in conversation. He's having a Pro Bowl season. But last season, guys, remember how the season ended for Laremy Tunsil. Had the injury, an injury that most would expect the player would be able to come back from. Laremy doesn't come back from it. In the offseason, there's constant talks of, his name is constantly centered around trade talks and rumors. And then Houston and Laremy Tunsil work out a deal, bring him back, right? And it seems like he's here and he is a captain now, and he is a leader for this franchise right now. And since Laremy has got to Houston, only one playoff year, the rest of his time in Houston has been centered around chaos, filled with chaos. And so to see him have this type of season, this type of year, where he's honestly been dominant, where he's honestly been the best tackle in football, if not one, maybe 1A. Kudos to Tunsil. I'm happy for Tunsil. This is one of those moments in a season where your team only has one win. It takes me back to the bad Cleveland Brown days. Everything else was chaotic, terrible, bad to watch. They broke out the brown bag for the Cleveland Browns. But Joe Thomas, offensive linemen don't sell tickets. But at the very least, you can tell your family and friends, hey, well, I'll get an opportunity to see a player like Joe Thomas play football. Joe Thomas was in that infamous 2007 NFL class, one of the greatest classes of all time. And so for this year, you don't go to see a Texan game and say, hey, I'm going to see Laremy Tunsil. I get it. But at the very least, you can say, well, I saw Laremy Tunsil and he stonewalled Myles Garrett. Well, I saw Laremy Tunsil and he stonewalled maybe a Montez in the last couple of, the DeMarcus Lawrences or Micah Parsons of the world. You can say that I saw Laremy Tunsil play at the highest level of any left tackle, any tackle in the NFL this year, man. He deserves it. Not only does he deserve to be a Pro Bowl starter, he also deserves to be an All-Pro. I think this is his All-Pro year.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you, John. And the one thing that I would say about Laremy Tunsil, I wonder where all those people who are always screaming, trade Laremy Tunsil, get this and get that. Look, I understand, and as you just simply put it, there are several different reasons why Laremy Tunsil should not go out and give a Pro Bowl performance. As you mentioned, one win this year. This is an organization that has only won 5 games over the last 2 seasons. However, this is part of the reason why I always stood behind the trade for Laremy Tunsil, because it made sense at the time. You had your star quarterback. You also got an additional wide receiver that you can also use, even though that didn't work out as well either. But the one thing that you got to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, the Houston Texans were able to get their hands on one of, if not the best left tackle in the game. Even though things did not work out with Deshaun Watson, having Laremy Tunsil still on this team, and not only that, still playing at a high caliber level, lets me know that next season when you go out there and go draft Bryce Young or draft CJ, or maybe get lucky and throw a bag and orchestrate a deal for Lamar Jackson or whatever the case might be, whenever you go out there and get your next franchise quarterback that could definitely come within these next 6 months, you already know that your offensive line is going to be very solid. And his left side, 9 times out of 10, his blind side is going to be very protected because you have a guy like Laremy Tunsil. Other guys who was named as the NFL Pro Bowl as alternate, Dameon Pierce, man. John, I truly believe that this is a sign that Pierce has and should be named the Offensive Rookie of the Year. As I mentioned a lot here on this show, if there was ever an MVP caliber player for the Houston Texans in 2022, if it's not Laremy Tunsil, it's definitely Dameon Pierce. There has been time he elevated this team when the offense just looked god awful. Remember, he also had a big carry. You muted, by the way.
I'm sorry. I would have loved to see Dameon Pierce run behind Titus Howard and Laremy Tunsil on their left side, man. I
know, right?
That probably would have done some damage to some of these opposing defensive linemen.
Oh yeah, remember, even in their one win that they have against Jacksonville, he played, if not the biggest reason why they had an opportunity to score their long touchdown when he had that run for 25 yards and broke like 100 tackles in the midst of it. But another guy who I truly believe should have automatically been named a Pro Bowler, and probably more so if the Houston Texans had more wins, Jerry Hughes. You talking about, if not the best offensive acquisition for the Houston Texans, and of course on special teams. Yeah, defensive acquisition for the Houston Texans. And of course, on special teams, Kaimi Fairbairn, Cameron Johnson, both of those guys are alternates as well. So, even though things been terrible for the Texans this year, the fact that you still had a Pro Bowler, a starting Pro Bowler in Laremy Tunsil, and guys who are named alternate, which 9 times out of 10, I'm pretty sure some of these guys might drop out. So the Texans could have a possibility to have several players representing this team doing the Pro Bowl on February, I think it's 5th or 6th. I can't remember which one it was. But by the way, I also want to mention it. This is Laremy Tunsil's 4th season with the Texans, right? 1922, 122. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he's a Pro Bowler in 3 out of those 4 years.
He's been worth it. He's been. I mean, the reason why if we can tag the if we want to put a tag of not being worth it next to Laremy Tunsil is because the franchise hasn't been worth it. So, like Laremy Tunsil, which Houston, Bill O'Brien traded a lot for, I think he's held up his side of the bargain. Like, he's been that good. At times, you may have wanted more out of Laremy Tunsil, but when you look at the weighing scale of who's held up the side and who's been good, it's been Laremy Tunsil, and it hasn't been Houston. And again, this is just one of those situations where the product is bad, the overall product is bad, but you got some good things going on. You just need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to get the project in its totality to be better. But kudos to, Laremy Tunsil. I thought that maybe Desmond King should have been a Pro Bowl alternate for this season. He's had a phenomenal season. I think a lot of people may have overlooked his impact, but it may have just been his impact for the Houston Texans. But he's had a damn good season as well. Brandon K. Scott on the other side of the Locked On Texan podcast. So we're here to have fun on this Friday. And did you know that driving under the influence of marijuana is illegal? And if you drive while you're high, law enforcement can definitely tell. So if you feel different, you drive different. If you drive different, you get a DUI. Also, I want to let you guys know about Turo. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want wherever you want it from a community of local hosts across the U.S., U.K., Canada, and Australia. So forget those boring rental cars. Find your drive at Turo.com. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers out there. As of right now, Friday, getting ready for a Saturday's showdown against the division rival Tennessee Titans, who will be without Ryan Tannehill. I haven't personally had this opportunity to have one of these solo conversations with one of the more impressive and I call him a smart brother, man, in terms of how he presents football on the radio, 16 Radio. Brandon K. Scott is joining the Locked On Texan podcast. Welcome to the show, brother.
Man, I'm glad to be here, man. And just so y'all know, like, this is one of my preferred guest spots, man. I didn't cancel. I'm playing hurt just to give the listeners. Yeah, I'm telling you, I'm playing hurt, man. And I just to give the listeners a little bit of insight. I didn't cancel radio appearances. I didn't cancel doctor's appointments, but I wasn't gonna cancel with my boy John and Cody for sure. So I'm glad to be here with you, my guy, and glad to be here with the listeners, the Locked On Texans audience.
Absolutely, man. And with the listeners right now, it's kind of hard for people to find anything positive about this season. So, like, up to this point, 3 games left, all division games. Before we dive into the division games that kick off against the Tennessee Titans, when we look at Houston's last 3 games, Cleveland Browns, Dallas Cowboys, Kansas City Chiefs, I think they've done something in each 3 of those games that you can take away as positives compared to when the season first started. Not allowing the Cleveland Browns to score an offensive touchdown, I thought that was pretty impressive. Holding the Dallas Cowboys to, 30 points or something along those lines, and really kind of forcing Dak to back-to-back games, forcing that quarterback to go in that last drive to score in order to win the game after the Dallas Cowboys had already just dropped 53 the previous week, and then holding the Kansas City Chiefs to that amount of points after the offensive explosion that they had the week prior, and they're going up against one of, if not who I consider the best quarterback in the league. On your side of things, when you evaluate this Houston Texan team, what are your most positive takeaways from the last 3 games?
Well, John, I would just reiterate the points that you just made. They held the Cowboys to 27 in that game. 27. And I would just reiterate the points that you just made and then highlight that the common theme of all of those 3 games is they were able to turn the opposing offense over. You know, and they went through a stretch there where they weren't getting turnovers. And I know this is something that we've discussed on previous episodes, something that y'all talked about without me and also with me making an appearance, is the sort of the lack of love necessarily for Lovie Smith's defensive scheme. But the thing that, and that's because it's bend but don't break, right? But the thing that he does preach, and, you know, it's kind of, sometimes it can be fluky and sometimes it can be based on luck, but you do have to be intentional about trying to take the ball away. And they've done that, you know, and I think it was no more impressive. It was, or I should say, it was most impressive in the most recent game, the one against Kansas City, where you got Mario Addison and I believe Tremon Smith. There was nothing fluky or lucky about the turnovers or the fumbles that they were able to force. Now, recovering fumbles can be fluky and lucky, but forcing them, those were just really good form tackles, and they just did a hell of a job of getting to the ball. And I think, to answer your question, if you look at all 3 games, I think that they've done a much better job of getting to the ball, playing with their hair on fire. I'm talking about the defense here, playing with their hair on fire and being a lot more intentional, at least it seems like, with forcing turnovers or creating takeaways. And I think even more impressive is the fact that they've been able to do it with a lot of backups out there. We mentioned Tremon Smith, somebody who has been somewhat of a revelation and is just flat out played well in substitution of either or both of Derek Stingley and namely Steven Nelson. So Steven Nelson, I think, is supposed to be back this weekend, but I would say their tenacity on defense and getting to the ball. I think has made a big difference and would be a positive. I would say even, and that's just focusing on the play, John, but I would say even more so big picture to answer this question, I would say the play of the rookies, because we were also having a conversation at some point about, man, are these rookies regressing? Are these rookies not developing the way that they should be under this coaching staff? And in year one, like, to me, I mean, once you get past the Davis Mills conversation, that was probably the most important conversation to have, is how do the rookies look? That will tell you the most about this rebuild, this process. And to their credit, and maybe I would say even to the coaching staff's credit, they've looked a lot better. From Christian Harris to Jalen Petrie namely, right? But also Christian Harris. Obviously, Derek Stingley's been hurt, and Kenyon Green's been hurt. But Tegan Cotoriano, man, the last game, like, I don't think I had any expectations of him as a pass catcher for the Texans. Kind of the word and the scouting report on him was blocking tight end, might catch a couple passes for you, but he runs solid routes. He's got soft hands, and I'm not saying he's about to be the next big thing or anything, but he at least seems to be a lot better than I was willing to give him credit for in the beginning when they made that pick. And also when he was injured during training camp, I thought, this might just be a throwaway draft pick. And now, you know, I'll admit that I was a little bit short-sighted on that. Should have given him a little bit more of a chance to actually go out there and show us what he could do. And when he's been out there, I've liked him. Thomas Booker hasn't been necessarily impressive, but he's hanging in there, and I think it's coming along. I probably expected more of him early on, but I think it's been fine, especially for where you drafted him. So if I were to say an overarching theme from the past 3 games, is that the rookies, at least the ones who have played, have seemed to play better.
You know, one thing that you mentioned just now, you mentioned 2 names that wasn't called as much during this season. Tremont Smith, Mario Addison, and both of those guys trying to get healthy through the better half of the season, the first half of the season. Then you mentioned Christian Harris, who was also a player that when the season kicked off, trying to get healthy, right? And he's also coming in on the curve. Tremont Smith and Mario Addison, they've been in the league for some time. The rookie, he's trying to learn and get healthy at the same time. So I also want to kind of pivot and stay with the defense. The addition of a healthy and his progression of Christian Harris, from what I'm seeing on the field, has helped out the front seven tremendously because he's able to flow sideline to sideline. But overall, what has been your thoughts of Christian Kirksey, who is a player, I think, now that Christian Harris has been on the field and has, you know, kind of cleaned up the sideline to sideline, trying to make, you know, cover and play that cover 2 role, Tampa 2 role as that linebacker. We've seen Christian Kirksey play phenomenally well when he's downhill. He's made a couple of sacks, getting some of these tackles for loss, and he just seems to be playing more instinctively. So when we look at the linebacker group, specifically the rookie Christian Harris, how much of a godsend player has he been for this defense now that he's progressing, and each week he's getting better and better and better?
Yeah, John, I actually love the way you just framed this question, because I don't know if I had given it enough thought of how much not only has he improved the defense, but how much he's maybe allowed Christian Kirksey to step his game up a little bit.
Because he's played much better.
Much better. And I have progression of Harris. And I've definitely noticed that, but for whatever reason, until you just laid it out the way you did, I don't think I had made the connection as much, and I should have. So I appreciate you for saying that. But to the point, I mean, you talk about Christian Kirksey getting there, tackles for loss. He's gotten his hands on some balls in the passing game, deflected at least one pass I can remember. Maybe it was the Dallas game. But, I mean, he's played a lot better. I don't know if maybe Lovie Smith feels like he can do more with him because Christian Harris is able to cover more ground. But you see them being a lot more aggressive, or at least you saw them being a lot more aggressive with their blitzes against Kansas City. It was one of the things that I talked to Patrick Mahomes about after the game myself. I asked him, hey, you know, what did you think of the defense overall? And did they do anything that surprised? And I knew the answer to this question when I asked him, but I wanted to give him a chance to say it. I said, did they do anything a little bit differently that maybe you hadn't scouted, or was just different from what you guys had scouted on film? And he said exactly what I was expecting, that they blitzed not more, but earlier in the game, and they weren't expecting to see that. And that was maybe the biggest adjustment defensively for the Texans going up against the Chiefs. I mean, you got to find a way somehow to rattle and disrupt Patrick Mahomes. Now, I say that Patrick Mahomes was a savant. He had a brilliant game individually, but I do feel like changing up the game plan a little bit and giving them some looks that they hadn't seen on film, or at least hadn't seen as early on film, gave them a little bit more of a puncher's chance to be competitive in that game, because at the very least they threw them off and they had to make adjustments and they had to think a little bit more about what they were doing against this defense. So, but to your point though about Christian Harris, yeah, man, like there was, I'm trying to think of what game it was, if it was the Cleveland game or maybe before, but it was a home game definitely, because I was in the press box and I was asking somebody like, hey man, I was excited for Christian Harris, but are we sure he's good? You know, because he had moments where he was up and down, and literally like ever since that moment, he's confirmed, yes.
I'm good.
Yes, I'm good.
I know what I'm doing. I'm pretty solid.
Hey, fair question in the moment, but kudos to him for answering it very definitively.
On the field.
So, on the field, yeah, man, because we can have these questions and it's up to them to answer them definitively on the field with their play. So, yeah, he's been excellent. I think he's also had some moments where he's still a rookie clearly, and he's got some growing pains. Like you'll see that show up on film. But overall, I think your point is solid about him being a rangier, faster linebacker. We got to always remember when we have this conversation and bring this topic up specifically, we cannot forget that he used to be a defensive back. Like Nick Saban converted him from safety to linebacker. I don't know if just because of size or because he was a thumper or what, but obviously he's got cover skills because he has a background in doing that. That's what got him to Alabama to begin with. Mm-hmm. So you got to keep that in mind that he is, I think I've said this before on the show too, he's today's linebacker. He's this age's linebacker of maybe a little bit smaller than the thumpers that you're used to from when you were growing up, but still big enough to be a solid tackler.
And plays with the speed and velocity too.
Yes.
Like he's fast. He gets to his spots fast. So
play speed. Play speed. Like,
and I think that helps out with disrupting the opposing offense.
100%. 100%. And I don't think that you had like Kamagruje Hill was somebody who was given credit for his speed, but he to me was a smaller but much more of a version of what you were talking about with Christian Kirksey, more of a downhill type of guy, and not as fast as I thought maybe he would be from sideline to sideline. He just come crashing down and be really solid with his speed in the run game, but he was smaller. So then that would kind of negate that. Whereas Christian Harris much more so seems to fit that athletic profile of the linebacker that you want in this type of offense, in this type of defense, especially when you talk about the middle of the field being wide the hell open all the time. Christian Harris has done a much better job of filling that role.
Definitely want to let you guys know about betonline.net, which is your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds, trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football, college bowl season, they've got you covered over at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can even find those over at betonline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thanks for making the Locked On Texans your first listen today. Now make the Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else acts with your local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today podcast is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You know, it's always good to have a family here. Q's family reunion from the OJs, the original version, and talk sports, man. So I look at these opportunities like I'm sitting around a table. That table has Ebony Jet magazines on all over there, little dust on the bottom, and you even have like the classic 1992 Is Shaq the Next Phenom magazine that's ripped apart in a lot of those pages. just to talk sports. It's unfortunate that we have to waste a lot of that good energy on a team that's not necessarily doing as well right now, which hits the end game / embrace the tank talk. Now, when we look at the Houston Texans, Titans, Jags, Colts, that's how they are ending their season. 3 AFC South division games to end it off, with an opportunity to spoil the Tennessee Titans' hopes of making the playoffs. If they beat the Tennessee Titans on Sunday, I want to let you guys know that the Jags already beat Tennessee, so they have a game up on them, and it may come down to the Jags and the Houston Texans. But can Houston make life difficult for Tennessee's chances to make the playoffs, Brandon?
Yeah, make it difficult? I think certainly so. Like, I don't see why they couldn't, especially given how they've played the last few games, like we were talking about in the previous segment. Like, if they play up to that level where they were competitive against the Cowboys, they were competitive against the Chiefs, both teams that I think we could fairly say are better than the Titans, then I don't see why they couldn't. Now, the thing to keep in mind here, if you want to kind of be critical and be skeptical, which I'm prone to be, is that, man, that last game that they played against the Titans, the one that was here, the one that was in Houston, was one of the more embarrassing,
stunk,
and just lifeless games and just like moments that I can remember being a part of at NRG Stadium, man. Like, it was, I think lifeless is the word I just used. That's probably a good term for it. Because, I mean, you think about the fact that they didn't have Ryan Tannehill, which is going to replicate itself today or in this game with Malik Willis starting again. And they refused to throw the ball. I think he had 6 completions all game and threw it maybe once in the second half.
Yeah, it was bad.
It was bad. And Derrick Henry basically can just make it an appointment, just pencil in for his stats that he's going to go over, he's going to flirt with a couple of hundred, not one, 200 yards, that he's going to flirt with that every time he plays against the Texans. And so, like, to piggyback on the conversation we were having earlier, yes, if they play like that, I feel like they've got a chance. However, if we make it specific to this game and this matchup, the thing that worries me is just that the Titans' strength plays right into the environment of how this game is going to be played. Mm. It's going to be cold. Mm-hmm. Wind might be a factor as well. And they've got a quarterback that they rightfully probably don't trust to throw the ball much, even if the weather conditions were perfect. We saw that, in a indoor climate-controlled setting here in Houston. So you add that to the dynamics, at the weather element to what they got going on in Tennessee, and they know the scouting report. Like, as good as the Texans have played defensively, or as much better as they've played defensively these last couple of games, it's not like all of a sudden they're good against the run. Maybe they've been better at times, but come on. Like, I don't feel like we have a huge expectation that we're going to see something that's a whole lot different from this Texans run defense against Derrick Henry, especially if they're going to be real deliberate and intentional about giving him the ball, right, given who their quarterback is and given what the weather conditions are.
And also mention that they can use their quarterback to help out the run game as well. They don't trust him with his arm, but they may trust his legs.
Yeah, kind of similar to, I made this point last week with Cody, that the move to Jeff Driscoll, the 2-quarterback system, after the Texans went away from Kyle Allen and brought Jeff Driscoll back up from the practice squad and employed this 2-quarterback system, a lot of the focus was on the whole quarterback angle of it because Davis Mills had played so poorly and Kyle Allen was even worse. And so it's like, okay, they're just, throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks and, all of that. And Jeff Driscoll does add a different dynamic. But the point that I thought was important to remember with that, and I think it plays a little different context, obviously, because the quarterback's hurt in this situation, but it plays with Malik Willis, is that this supplements your run game. Okay, bringing in Jeff Driscoll supplements your run game, and I thought that was the more important part about it, particularly against the Cowboys. But I'd apply sort of the same logic, just under different contexts and circumstances, with Malik Willis and the Tennessee Titans. No, he's not in there to replace the underperforming quarterback or anything like that, but he Him being in there, though, does, I think, open up some possibilities for them in the run game, or could at least. And so that's something to watch out for. And if there's a thing I'm going to be concerned about with the Texans, to your question about can they make this interesting? Can they be the spoiler, so to speak, or make life difficult on the Titans as they try to win this division? That's where I would have a hang up about it is what do they got for Derrick Henry? And what do they got for Malik Willis in the run game, knowing good and doggone well he's not going to throw the ball a ton of times. And I think that was the frustrating part too, John, was that they knew, especially by the second half.
Yeah.
Okay. And they knew the whole game, but certainly by the second half, they knew exactly what the game plan was and just couldn't do nothing about it. And so I worry about that is there even an adjustment to be made? I don't know the answer to that. Is there an adjustment to be made? Or can they just bow up and be better? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that, and if we look at the last 3 games, I think that Houston did a better job of making pregame adjustments going into the game, especially offensively, right? I look at an offense that I think is worse from last year. I can say it's worse than last year. More uncertainty than from last year. The only certainty now is you cannot come out of this upcoming draft without a quarterback. But Pep Hamilton has struggled a lot, right? Whether that may have been on him not trusting his quarterback or just not being able to kind of figure it out and helping out this team that lacks talent. So when we see Jeff Driscoll, become a start a game and become a part of this offense, I thought that was a pregame adjustment that they made in the past 3 games that they didn't do early in the year. Finding whatever small way that you can find to help out your team secure a dub. And it's helped this team in terms of not necessarily looking not uncompetitive. I mean, they've looked competitive in the past couple of games, especially offensively in the past 2 games. These are some of the moments that, to your point, on both ends, making sure that the adjustments are made before halftime gets here. So when the ball kicks off, the first 15-minute mark of the game, when the game kicks off, what were your adjustments to beat this team? Because I think this is a winnable game. I honestly think they can win the next 3 games. They can end this season off winning 2 out of 3 games. Winning 1 game. They have the Jags number no matter how good the Jags have looked. They've, historically been able to beat the Jags. The Indianapolis Colts just blew a 33-0 lead. I have no faith in this team led by Jeff Saturday. And then we look at a team in the Tennessee Titans on Saturday that is without Ryan Tannehill, who wasn't playing tremendous ball. And you look at how Houston has been playing as of late defensively, that maybe they can get it. Maybe they can get a win, a dub. Lastly, before we get out of here, embrace the tank is something that I've been kind of hashtagging on Twitter. And I started it a few weeks ago when it was clearly this team wasn't going to do anything seriously this year. But embracing the tank for Houston, there is an end game. Embracing the tank goes hand in hand with that. So my question is with you, with the number 1 overall pick, is it still Bryce Young?
Yeah, man. I don't see why not. I don't see why it wouldn't be. I really don't. I've
had some people tell me that's around that locker room, around that franchise, that the Houston Texans like C.J. Stroud. So is there an opportunity to take another impactful player with the number 1 overall pick and then try to trade up for C.J. Stroud? Because Detroit doesn't need a quarterback. I don't think so. Oakland, I think, is in top 5 at this time. I can't remember, but the next team would be Detroit. At the beginning of the year, we were looking at them getting the quarterback, or do you secure it with Bryce Young? Don't worry about trading up for C.J. Stroud and go get your franchise quarterback with the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, man. This is – maybe I'm jaded a little bit from last year and the fact that Kenyon Green had a disappointing rookie year. And honestly, no, I don't think that's what it is, now that I say that out loud. For me, it's just we don't have to get too cute and creative about this. We don't have to be football GM genius. Hey, let's be clever. and get a different player and trade back. Like, quite honestly, and I don't think that C.J. Stroud would go number 2. I think that if Detroit gets that second pick or whoever gets that second pick, like I can't say for sure that C.J. Stroud's going second, but to me, if you like one of these quarterbacks, whether it be Bryce Young, C.J., for me it's Bryce Young, but I understand that there's room to disagree on these things. I'm not unreasonable. So whether it's Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Will Levis, I think those are the only 3 that at this point are probably in that conversation. And I'm not a Will Levis guy. Don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating for that. But if that is your guy, if your guy is a quarterback in the first round and is somebody that's going to be taken, reasonably speaking, in the first 15 picks, 10 picks at a draft, just go ahead and take him.
Just take him.
Just take him. Just take him. Like, to me, it is fool's gold to, especially when you need a quarterback as desperately as you do, to start playing footsie and mind games with that position and then mess around and not be able to get your guy. So I think that that's the whole benefit. Like, why even – that's the whole benefit to me of having the number 1 overall pick when you need a quarterback, okay? I'm thankful as somebody who wants good things to happen for the Texans that, honestly, and it's not that I would have had a problem with Aiden Hutchinson or any of the guys that were at the top of the draft last year, but I am glad that the Texans, in a year when they do have the number 1 overall pick or could possess the number 1 overall pick, that there are number 1 overall pick worthy quarterbacks to take. And I really only think that there's 2 that we're talking about, and that would be Bryce Young and Stroud. But I know that Will Levis is gaining some energy for whatever reason. So fine, be that as it may. But don't get too cute, especially if you're going to go against the Bryce Young pick or you're going to go rogue and go get somebody else. Like, just go get him, man. Go get him. If you want to wheel and deal with that second pick like you did last year. You know what I mean? Like, that's the one to play with. Or I guess your question was more so pick somebody else with the first pick and then wheel and deal with that second pick. That was more so your question. But anyway, quarterback, man. Bryce Young. They were just talking about this on the radio before you and I, my guys at Sports Radio 610 were talking about this on the radio before you and I started recording. And I've actually said this before, but Bryce Young to me has potential to be a more mobile, more athletic Drew Brees. Like that, like I think that's what I'm saying now. Does he have a Sean Payton to unlock it?
Not yet.
That's a whole nother discussion and question that needs to be asked and answered.
Not yet.
But in terms of potential and what he could be and how bothered I am not by the size, I am a little bit concerned about the size. But I've also watched him play in the SEC. And so, yeah, no, it's not ideal that he looks like a pedestrian out there in terms of his physical stature. He looks like a regular guy that you just might run into. But he doesn't play like it. He my size, but he faster. He my size, but he's stronger. He my size, but he can throw the damn ball. So, like, I'm not worried about him being my size because he don't play like me. You know what I'm saying? He play like somebody that should be the number 1 overall pick. So that's it for me. Pick Bryce Young, take him number 1 overall. Wheel and deal with the second pick if you see fit. I would personally like to take a weapon. Like I'm all about weapons at this point. You know, it's a bend but don't break defense right now. We'll see what happens with the coaching staff. But to me, I think you are markedly better as a team with a franchise quarterback and a true number 1 option as your weapon, whether that be Addison out of USC, whether that be Quentin Johnson, or is it Johnson or Johnston?
It's Johnson out of TCU.
The tall one out of TCU with the dreadlocks.
TCU.
Dude is tall and skinny, but plays tough as well. Really good good hands and yards after the catch.
Can fly.
Somebody like that, somebody in that ilk, I think could help you a lot. And that to me is the way to go. Like I've said this a lot, man, that the Cincinnati Bengals didn't necessarily wait for the Bengals to be the perfect environment before they went and drafted their obvious number 1 overall pick as a quarterback. They didn't wait until everything was perfect Because quite honestly, they the Cincinnati Bengals. And everything ain't gonna never be perfect with the Cincinnati Bengals.
No, it's not.
They got one of the lowest budget scouting departments that you'll ever find, and have been run poorly for years. But what did they do? They made a couple of good free agent moves. The Texans are going to have some money this year. They can go sign some free agents. They made a couple of really good and obvious draft picks back-to-back years in Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I think here with the Texans, they have an opportunity to get – I'm not saying that these guys are going to for sure be as good as them, but that's what you're gunning for, right? That's what you're trying to project. They have a chance to go get that sort of tandem and make their turnaround. If not like that, certainly accelerate this rebuild that we're already in now in year 3 of a losing season. Like, I don't know how much longer, especially like we talk about the people that listen and watch this podcast, people that listen to Sports Radio 610, the one that really, really care about the Texans on a day in and day out basis. I don't see how y'all can just wait a whole another year, another 2 years, and just be like, shoulder shrug. We'll get it together.
I hate
5 years from now. Come on now.
I hate
you not tired of this yet?
I hate the rhetoric of tanking for another year for Caleb Williams. I think that is the worst idea on this planet.
It's not a plan. It's not a plan at all.
Yeah, and the front office led by Nick Caserio, he can't afford that.
Yeah,
if he's here.
Well, I would go further and say, because I know there's been a lot of conversation about everybody's job security, and Nick's going to get another year. We don't even have to discuss that. But if anybody over there is using that logic and that line of thinking, they should be fired immediately.
Right, man, thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Saturday's game, so check this out on Friday. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Subscribe to the Locked On Texans YouTube page under the name Locked On Texans. We are at 2,500 now. We want to get to, let's say, 2,550 by the end of the year. Got a couple more days left in the year. Brandon K. Scott, thank you for stopping by. And as always, where can they find you on social media and all of your projects, including the B Block Podcast?
Yeah, man. So at Brandon K. Scott on Twitter, at B Scott from Hiram Clark with an E at the end on Instagram. I'm trying to do a little bit more on Instagram these days. So check me out there. And the B Block Podcast every week, wherever you get your podcast. Now, I think I'm done for the year with the B Block Podcast, but we're going to pick it back up after the new year, first week of the new year. So make sure y'all check that out. Wherever you get your podcast. Also doing, if you're a Rockets fan, because I'm assuming Texans fans, sometimes there's some crossover, doing a Rockets podcast too with my guy Adam Spillane, H-Town Hoops podcast. You can check that out on Odyssey, wherever you get your podcast. And yeah, man, we out. Oh, the week after Christmas. So obviously Christmas Day is on Sunday. Back up actually, because this is going to drop on Friday. How about this? On Saturday, okay, after the game, I kid you not. After the game, I'm filling in for Clint Sterner on the post-game show.
Ooh.
I'm super excited about this, y'all.
What time?
So it's, as soon as the game ends, Mark Vandermeer and Andre Ware do their little wrap-up, and then like 15, 20 minutes pass. So about 15, 20 minutes after the game, me and Sean Pendergast will be on the post-game show on Sports Radio 610. You can catch that on the radio or on Odyssey. On the Odyssey app, under Sports Radio 610 or sportsradio610.com. So no matter where you at or what you got going on, if you want to listen to the post-game show, I'm going to be on it. And I'm trying to do it justice, filling in for my man Clint. I appreciate them for trusting me with that, to do that. It's my first time doing it. I'm excited about it. Would love for y'all to be a part of it, enjoying call. We take more calls on the post-game show than we ever do during the week. So if you want to get something off your chest, you want to get it off, especially after the game, that's the time to do it. So check me out then. And then the week, obviously the day after Christmas, that week that starts, I'll be on 10 to 2 the whole week, filling in for In the Loop on Sports Radio 16. So check me out. Got
a lot of content, got a lot of everything going on surrounding the Houston Texans. So make sure you check us out. B-Block Podcast, 610 Radio, Locked On Texans. Everything local is where you should live. Until we can talk to y'all on Monday, peace. Enjoy the weekend. Merry Christmas.